Good afternoon. My name is Eric Jones, and I'm director of the Robert Schuman Center. And it's my great privilege to have within our community an enormous amount of expertise on this very topical issue. And so we're joined today by a range of people from across the institution. And we're going to talk about the legislative proposal to reform the Stability and Growth Pact. Now, I wish I could say that it was my idea to organize the conversation, but in fact, and you can't see his name because it's hiding behind the computer, the idea came from Federico Fabbrini, and it is a great crystallization of insight. Now, I'm going to hand over to Federico to introduce our participants and to lay out the ground rules for the conversation. But before I do so, I hope you all join me in welcoming the participants and in thanking Federico for this initiative. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric, for your kind introduction, but it's really me that has to thank you and the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies for hosting this event. And I have to say from the very beginning, I share the blame or the merits really with Marco Butti, the new Tommaso Padoa-Schioppa chair here at the Robert Schuman Center for putting this event together. And let me also thank warmly Sarah Berenstein and Lucrezia Rossi here at the UI and the DCU Brexit Institute for the administrative support. Now it is on a personal level, a huge pleasure to be back in Villa Schifanoia at the UI, where I did my PhD. I think I defended in the room just across the corridor some 10 years ago. But beyond that, at the institutional level, it's a real honor for the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence Rebuild, which I lead at the DCU Brexit Institute, to be able to co-host this initiative together with the UI Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Study. Just as a word of introduction on Rebuild, it is a project funded by the European Union. It's focused on economic governance in Europe. The acronym Rebuild stands for Recovery of Europe, Budget of the Union, Integration, Law, and Democracy, as you can see from the pop-up stand. And I'm pleased to say that Commissioner Gentiloni launched the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence a year and a half ago. Now, the topic of this seminar fits perfectly, I think, at the intersection between the research work of the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence Rebuild and that of the Tommaso Padoa-Schioppa chair, which both are focusing on EMU governance in a broadly intended sense. And I think the decision to host this event in a hot June day here in Florence is really motivated by the fact that about 6 weeks ago, the European Commission has put forward legislative proposal to reform the Stability and Growth Pact. This builds on a long period of discussion and reflection, which was also largely driven by the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. But now it's the time to focus on what's on the table, what has been put on the table by the Commission. And I think we could not be luckier, as you already said, Eric, in terms of bringing together a huge amount of expertise, interdisciplinary expertise from, I think we can proudly say, all 4 departments of the European University Institute. So my role here is mostly as a chair, and I will be introducing the speakers in the order in which they will intervene. And if I have time, I might add something myself, but I think we should leave as much time as possible for questions and answers. So the first speaker will be Marco Butti, who is the new Tommaso Padoa-Schioppa chair at the UI, but has, before taking over this academic role, a very long experience as an official in the European Commission, where, among other, he was the Director General of DG ECFIN and more recently the chef de cabinet of Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni. In fact, Marco will be the first to speak because he has been playing a leading role in the preparation of the Commission legislative proposals for the new Stability and Growth Pact. That's really the last thing you did before leaving Brussels. So we are fortunate that you can outline also the proposals from an inside perspective, the man inside, as the title of your book says. Then the second speaker will be Adrienne Héritier, who also needs really no introduction. She is Professor Emeritus at the Department of Political and Social Science here at the UI, and has been hanging around since 1995, as she reminded me recently, so a well-known face for everybody. Then I will ask Emmanuel Moulin-Drouol to speak. Emmanuel is Professor of History and European Civilization at the Department of History of the UI European University Institute, where he also got his PhD some, I think, 12, 13 years ago. And he will approach the topic from an historical perspective. And then finally, last but not least, we are fortunate to have also Anna Peicheva, who is a Max Weber Fellow at the Robert Schuman Center and EY Law Department. She has a PhD in law from Kent University in the United Kingdom, and she's a specialist on the ECB. So we have a fantastic panel. Without further ado, I'll immediately hand over the floor to you, Marco, to lay out the groundwork for our discussion. And let me thank again everybody for joining us here today, both in the room and on Zoom.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric and Federico. I have prepared a couple of slides, actually 2 slides, literally. It is my, I think, the first event with the TPS hat. And I have to say, I've participated in the past week or 2 in other events. I have to start with a disclaimer because, you know, it's difficult to fully separate between lives. And actually, I can see some good friends and former colleagues joining online. So, you know, very much welcome also this, you know, bridge between past and present here. So, so very good. Federico, as you said, I mean, where we come from, you know, the path. It was 26th of April, the legislative proposals. If you go rewind, we started the economic governance review public consultation just before Brexit, and we had to suspend it because of, as we suspended the rules of the pact, we suspended also the consultation because of COVID, and then we started again and drew the let's say the main lessons from all the very extensive public consultation over the past 2 years back in November last year with a communication which was which outlined very much the essence of what eventually was translated in legal text in April. And as you said, I mean, it was basically my last shot as chief of staff of the commissioner. So, I mean, I will offer some considerations on the economic aspects of the reform, of the proposed reform of the SGP. Maybe let me start with some procedural elements, just to provide you a snapshot on where we are in the debate in Brussels, so that you can locate a bit where what the situation is there. The Commission came forward on the 26th of April with 3 legislative texts. So the proposed reform of the corrective arm, the preventive arm, and the directive on national fiscal frameworks. In the past, when we did, I think we have a regular schedule of reforming the pact every 5 years. So we hope this time to provide a setting that is more lasting than what we had, what we did previously. Unlike the previous times, where a lot of excitement was more on the corrective arm of the pact, this time the game is essentially in the regulation 1466 on the preventive arm of the pact. And I recall that that's important because it's the one actually that is in co-decision and with majority voting. The others, the parliament can offer their good advice and good ideas, but basically they are out of the game. This time, I mean, since the bulk of the changes are in the preventive arm, the parliament is going to play a very important role. They are actually deciding right now on the rapporteur. I think what I understand from Brussels is that there will be 2 co-rapporteurs for the whole, for the ensemble of the proposals. One coming from the SND and the other one from the EPP. At least that's my information. So unlike other times where they distributed a bit within the different groups, I think they tackle, which I think is an important choice. With potential ramification. I mean, one key issue looking at the more institutional part is whether the parliament is going to play the game, i.e. remaining, I think, within the, by and large, within the perimeter drawn up by the commission, or whether you would venture outside and, how far outside of that. So, but it's something I think we can take up in the discussion. I mean, the first point I would like to make before going to my first slide is on the assessment of the shortcomings of the current framework. This was, there were not so much now in the legislative proposal, but in the November communication. And this, I think you can summarize, and I do it with keywords, not going in any of the intricacies. I think large understanding that there is over complexity of the rules, being very cumbersome and with many indicators, rules, sub rules, etc. Second point was especially with the debt rule, the 1/20th. So the indication that one would have to reduce the debt by 1/20th per year from the current level to the 60%. It has proven to be an unrealistic pace of debt reduction. Third point was a tendency to have a built-in pro-cyclical bias in the rules. That's the third element. The fourth is we have a reform clause, an investment clause, but overall rather limited incentives for reform and investment. Fifth, lack of ownership of the rules. I think both on the traditionally more rigorous countries and also those more fiscally lax countries. And sixth, and maybe the result of all the previous ones, is a relatively low enforcement. Not many countries, I think half of them never met the medium-term objective. The debt-based EDP was never opened as such. So these were a list of the shortcomings. I think if you try to find here a key word which joins up a bit these various shortcomings, I think is that's maybe put it in silent, please. Yeah, I showed the slide exactly. So this is we can go to the first one, if it works. Okay, there we are. Okay, I have also the thing. Okay, so basically, and I've tried to encapsulate here the main question that the Commission had to address strategically, and I formulated in the form of a trilemma. So the Stability and Growth Pact trilemma, and I mean, it's a way to tell a story. It's not an absolutely watertight trilemma of the type, more Mandel-Fleming that you have in economic theory. But nonetheless, I think it allows to capture well, I think, the kind, in my view at least, the kind of dilemmas that, or the kind of difficult options we are facing. So basically, what this trilemma tells you is that it is very difficult to foster ambitious investment and reforms agenda for for sustainable growth, a rapid pace of debt reduction, and ensuring at the same time strong national ownership and political stability. So you can combine the two of the three corners here, and you see the various solutions. And okay, I'm not going to go through the trilemma, but what is basically underpinning the proposal of the Commission is to try to foster incentives to put the money where your mouth is. So investment and reforms for national goals, but also for European goals. If you look at the annex to the 1466 revised regulation, you have the list there of the objectives, and the objectives include also European priorities. So incentive for investment and reforms and national ownership. So that is a key element. I mean, the feeling is that with the current rules, something plunging from Brussels to the member states rather than being owned by the member states themselves. So in order to achieve that, then what the proposal of the Commission is to accept to have a reduction of public debt, but at a more feasible, gradual pace than you would have under the current rules. And that type of lower gradient, so a more gradual pace of debt reduction, would create a space for the fiscal space with national resources, obviously, but in the national budgets to pursue the investment and reforms. And we put the ball in the national camp to ensure national ownership, because what the proposal of the Commission gives us is member states having to come forward with national structural fiscal plans. And a big discussion that we have there, and especially with Germany and other countries, how to ensure that you have national ownership so that the member states come forward with their own proposals, whilst ensuring a level playing field and a set of rules which are, let's say, apply to everybody. So we do not go into a pact a la carte. But so this is, I think, actually, if I look at the debate right now in Brussels with the member states, this is probably the most delicate, conundrum there. So, okay, this is basically a sketching out of the of where we or what we are trying to address, and what I have now with the other slide, which, I mean, this does not say. Okay, fine. Okay, what I do here in this complex slide, is my final one, is to show how the reform of the EU fiscal rules is so central to the debate, not only to have let's say, a functioning set of rules per se, but also to the ramifications to other challenges that we have. But what you see, I mean, I think I basically encapsulate the current policy challenges into the four corners here. So inflation / possibly stagflation risks. Second is financial fragmentation, as the ECB is withdrawing monetary support after the long period of largesse, to put inflation under control. Delivering on the twin transition and tackling the competitiveness by slash IRA challenge. And what you can see here is that I put the reform of the EU fiscal rules at the center, and you can see the arrow with the rationale for how the EU fiscal rule, reformed EU fiscal rules, and say a credible framework would help on the various to tackle the various challenges. So I'm not going to go through each one of them. I think we had 10 minutes, so I'm already well beyond my time. But you can see that the way that those interactions are depicted, at least in my view, in this here. I mean, I finish with one consideration. How many times we have been told, look, don't put us, I put my previous hat on, commission thing. Don't put your finger into that because it is so poisonous. The member states are so divided that, you risk a lot by opening up that thing. Just, after the general escape clause that is going to end, if not, barring major disasters at the end of this year. So rules will be reinstated at the beginning of next year. Just, apply the rules that we have in a flexible way. Just, exploit the investment clause, small investment clause that we have now to allocate the resources. And, don't do something more ambitious because you risk to burn your fingers. So this is one of the advice. My view is that the EU fiscal rules, rightly or wrongly, are so much at the core of economic policy making in the EU that if we do not converge onto a broadly shared framework, very difficult in my view to believe that one could make progress on other areas if you have this big elephant in that room not being properly addressed. So all these other things here that you see, I think they will be very difficult to these challenges to be met without finding to converge on the EU fiscal rules. Let me say just one final word on procedures there. What is happening now is that after the Commission proposals, this is going to go through the committees in Brussels. Plutarchos, you have actually the committee you were sitting on, the EFC-WG, is actually not at the core of the discussion because it's a council working group that is going to take that task. So the EFC and the ministers obviously will give guidance, but the actual negotiations takes place in a specific working group of the council. Let's hope there, and that is it's a big issue. In the past, we have seen a bit of trembling on that front. Let's hope that those who sit in that committee are sufficiently empowered to make compromises and to find a good landing zone, and not simply uttering again the preferred national positions. The council in March so the ECOFIN Council adopted an important set of conclusions and looked at the end of the year as the calendar for finding an agreement there. What it means exactly, since we are in co-decision, will have to be seen. There is one question mark for myself, and it is in July. And you know what is happening in July? In July, you will have a Spanish election. And in Spain will hold the rotating presidency. So the hope is that there is no, excessive distraction, and the presidency would continue to push forward, because otherwise, if we stop there and you do not exploit fully the Spanish 6-month presidency till the end of the year, then next year we enter into a completely different world with the semester of European elections. So, and we have seen in the past that sometimes when we have left files hanging on from one legislature to the other, often we have to restart from scratch, which would be a total disaster in my view in this case.
Thank you very much, Marco, for this very helpful introduction. And I would say, in the interest of time, without further ado, I'll move on to Adrienne, who also has PowerPoints.
My file. Here, how? I can't see it now. Oh, here we are.
This is the one, right?
That's the one, and maybe the.
Perfect.
Exactly. Thanks. Thanks very much for inviting me to comment from a political science perspective on the legislative proposal of the Commission. And now where do I get this?
Oh, that doesn't work.
It's off.
It's not working. Yeah, but how do I move then?
Just tell me.
Okay, if you could move. So from an analytical political science perspective, of course, you look at what are the actors involved, the main actors, what are their preferences over policy outcomes, what are their preferences also over institutional outcomes as regards their own power. And of course, you would then try to explain, you have a process of contest between these actors, who wins out, why, in the given framework of the given institutional rules, what are the policy outcomes, but also what are the changes in institutional outcomes, who gains in power and who doesn't. So the next slide, please. So we already heard now which legislative proposal we are talking about, and the main one, the most important one, is of course the SGP on the co-decision. And next slide, please. So we have the cleavages, which you are all aware of, between the member states, and there is a conflict which has been shaping up for about 2 years already now. If you basically, it boils down to flexible rules versus rigid rules, uniform rigid rules. And the Southern Coalition has been actually advancing proposals for a reform of the SCGP quite early on. And then there was a counter initiative of the Northern, if you want to call it, alliance with Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Austria, and also Latvia, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. And in the initiative of the southern member states, which allied, were Italy, clearly, France, Spain, and Greece. Now, there were responses to the proposals of the Commission, the one of the November, and then the one in April 23. Next slide, please. And the responses were by the European Parliament, of course, which, as was already said, will play a much more important role this time round in the Stability and Growth Pact reform, already emphasized that in June 21, that there should be more democratic legitimacy, accountability, and scrutiny of economic governance in general by the European Parliament. And in an own initiative report in March 23, it reaffirmed again that they should be fully involved in the reform of the SCGP, also in the council regulations. Next slide, please. So the different positions of the different political groups talking for their political groups, Germany clearly was a PPP along the lines, said amendments are necessary, both November proposal and April proposal, strict fiscal policy, uniform, strict fiscal rules. The SED groups, the kind of being kind of presented by Marquez in the name of the group, more national ownership and flexibility. And in the given proposal, social dimension is too weak. What is missing entirely is a permanent EU investment capacity and not enough accountability to the EP. The Renew group, also opposed to, represented by Jan Courtin, opposed to uniform rules as well, no return to austerity policy as a position. And Belgium, again, also for more flexibility and an emphasis on green transition investments and digital investments. And the next one, position of Italy, Zanni, Identità Democrazia, of the Lega against the old rule of the parameters 3% and 60%, and also the institutional point, too much power to the European Commission, too little parliamentary control. And the left, for Portugal, too little protection for green and digital investments, also along the lines kind of proposed by Italy. And now Germany plays a very kind of special role in this context now in the response to the proposal of the Commission. Lindner immediately said, no, this proposal is inadequate. It doesn't guarantee appropriate reduction of public debt. Therefore, we need simple and transparent rules for all member states. And they say it's very, Lindner argues and Germany argues, we don't want bilaterally politically negotiated rules or debt reduction plans between the Commission and individual member states, but we want a multilateral control of fiscal surveillance. What is being asked, I don't have to remind that because we've already told what is in the proposal. If you could, next slide. So Lindner, of course, you also have to see what you do in political science. We looked at multiple levels as well. And of course, Lindner is under pressure because the FDP, Free Democratic Party, has lost in regional elections quite a bit. And he's trying to kind of show more profile and has been exerting strong pressure on the Commission and threatening again and again a possible German veto. And of course, it was mentioned already, time il tempo stringe. So there is little time left until the clause expires, until the elections next year of the European Parliament. And you know, from negotiations, of course, the more patient actor has a more powerful position. And Germany, in a way, calculates, that was maybe a bit too fast. Could you go back again? Because the fallback option, kind of Germany doesn't dislike the fallback option, which are the old rules, right? Strict rules, austerity. And therefore it has more patience, and therefore it can weight in the negotiations and is more powerful. Next slide, please. And so the response to the critique of the Northern Alliance, plus also the Central European and Baltic states, was of the Commission to introduce the safeguards, which you are aware of, and now has triggered a conflict between Germany on one side and its allies, if you want to, always stressing also, Linda, it's not only Germany, we have a lot of allies. He says that every time he talks to the press, and France and Italy on the other side. And Spain, of course, as well. So France argues budget regime is too rigid. We are opposed to a uniform automatic deficit and debt reduction rules. And Italy argues there's too little scope for investments in digital and green investments, which are not included in the debt calculation. And also a multi-level aspect. Again, Meloni now is kind of withholding the yes to the EMS and tries to use it as a negotiation chip. And what was mentioned before, the kind of upcoming Spanish election, are also kind of looming large, which means it's very hard to say what will happen, what the pressure will be on the Spanish government as the president of the council. And now, regarding the institutional implications of the proposal are really interesting because it clearly means there is more power for the Commission. Negotiating bilaterally with member state governments and coming up with bespoke solutions for each member state empowers, of course, the Commission, particularly, of course, vis-a-vis the highly indebted member states. What the rules say, if the member state rejects the plan proposed by the Commission could impose it unless the member state would be supported by the entire European Council, which would mean unanimity, or at least a large majority of members of the European Council. And another institutional implication is that member state parliaments lose institutional power in kind of defining the national budgets. And one aspect of the instruments which are proposed by the Commission may be problematic as well, because the argument is that institutionally, the analysis of deficit sustainability is such a complex instrument. Nobody can understand it. It's not transparent. It's a technical trajectory, an algorithm based, and it comes out something which the EC proposes to a member state in the bilateral negotiations, and the member state can hardly say no, but doesn't really have a choice. So what is the upshot of this is that de facto the Commission has a co-decision power on crucial political economic parameters of member states' policies. And the next slide, please. So what we heard again, to more ownership of member states, that was one of the objectives, and clearly it's part of the proposal. That is, there's more time, 4 years to 7 years even, of fiscal policy planning, and then declining debt for at least 10 years. But we have to see that the initiatives to member states for investment programs and fiscal objectives will be immediately under the monitoring of the preventive arm, and the corrective arm of the SGP if the goals should not be pursued or achieved. Next slide. So another institutional problem you have in the proposal is that by legislation, member states are defined as different risk categories. And if you do that in a legislative act, of course, the high risk countries are Italy and Greece, medium are France, Spain, Belgium, Portugal, and Ireland, and the rest is low. That has, of course, impact in financial markets, clearly, and that is very much contested and criticized. And where you also have a more institutional stringency is in the strengthening of the EC sanctioning powers by, for instance, blocking the next generation EU funds if the member state is not compliant with debt deficit reduction, and an automatic opening of infraction procedures without a European Council decision. So last slide. So conclusion, we have a difficult trade-offs to envisage between more flexibility for member states with high debts, with a certain institutional loss in sovereignty, based on a stronger institutional control by the European Commission, and clearly less sovereignty for member governments in defining their fiscal policies, because they have to stick to the national plans previously concluded, which every new government has to take into account when planning its policies or campaigning for certain policies. So we have a very kind of strict choice between strict but unrealistic rules of the present CGP versus these more individualized bilateral shaping of fiscal planning between the East Powerful Commission and individual member states, and what has been voiced as a hope that through these dialogues more trust would be built in the kind of discourse of economic policy, fiscal policy in the EU. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Adrienne, for your presentation and for raising a number of issues, which I'm sure will provide for a good discussion with Marco later on as well. But before doing so, let me hand straight to Emmanuel Mourlon-Drouol, who will give us a historic perspective on the Stability and Growth Pact.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Federico and Marco, for having me. So I think the new rules that were proposed by the Commission illustrate actually rather well two central challenges precisely that were important historically to economic policy coordination. Actually, not just since the Stability and Growth Pact, but since the very creation of the European Union and actually the European Economic Community in 1957. The first one is the search for sustainability, whatever that means. I'll come back to that problem of definition. And the second one is the reluctance to centralize powers in the Union. The quest for trying to find appropriate rules, appropriate fiscal rules, is almost as old as European integration. Actually, just a few months after the Treaty of Rome had been signed and the European Economic Community was created, the member states, only 6 at the time, and the European Commission were already reflecting on how to ensure some coherence and some consistency among the policies, the economic policies of the member states. The context obviously was different. The context was the making of a common or then single market, not yet EMU, even if economic and monetary union was always luring in the background. But my point is that the big questions were the same. What economic policies should they try to coordinate? What system of common indicators could support this? And also very simply back then, how can we map out the different policies of the member states? I think it's worth pausing a little here to remember that we're coming very far when we're talking about this question of fiscal rules. I know a lot of time has passed in the late 50s, but I think it's still useful to realize what was and still in part is the European situation. We have very different national systems, very different not only economically, but also politically, sociologically, administratively. And partly as a result of this, there are very different ways of seeing the European economy, of seeing how we can research the European economy, how we can influence the European economy, how we can build a common understanding of what the European economy is or should be. So in the earliest period, in the 1960s, the Commission tried moral suasion. No real instrument existed to constrain the member states. So the first effort was to create a framework for discussion. By framework, I mean a space where these different issues could be discussed. By space, I mean creating institutions that didn't exist, in particular, the different economic policy committees. So at the very beginning, that was the short-term and medium-term economic policy committee, then that became the economic policy committee. This was also a time of debates in particular about something that came back en vogue recently, planning, debates about creating a European Institute for Economic Research. Then the other issue was that when we talk about economic policy coordination, we can have very different policy measures that were all discussed and put forward. You can have, for instance, a compulsory warning before a member state adopts a given policy stance. You can have a discussion in the council before, during, or after a stance is adopted. Or you can have the discussion about the respect of certain criteria. All these can take also very different forms, very different levels of constraints. Some are low. Exchanging information about economic policy coordination is not a very big constraint. Some are much higher, a legally binding framework involving the respect of certain norms, and that is what has been developed more in the 1970s. And some lay in between, indicative guidance, which is a phrasing that has been used in the Commission proposal. Then from the 80s and 90s, we moved into a period when the focus was rather on using indicators specifically to develop a workable system. And in 1997, the SGP, the Stability and Growth Pact, focused on two, in particular, debt and deficit. So viewed against this background, the Commission proposal is an attempt at simplification. The new system focuses on two elements: debt sustainability and a single operational indicator, which is a measure of public expenditure growth. And the crux is to ensure that the medium-term plan of one member state would ensure that public debt be kept on a plausibly downward path or prudent levels or within the 3% or 60% ratios. The other core element of the Commission proposal, and that the Commission proposal illustrates of this longer term view on fiscal rules, is the question of fiscal sovereignty. Fiscal sovereignty in the proposal and before in EMU remains firmly in the hands of government. Here again, this is a long-standing issue. Perhaps one of the most telling examples of this comes from the discussions within the Delors Committee. So the Delors Committee was a committee that was chaired by the President of the Commission, Jacques Delors, in 1988 and 1989, and that gathered a group of experts, mostly central bankers, to discuss and devise a report about the creation of the euro. That was called the Delors Report. And in one of the meetings, Jacques Delors said, I quote, "You understand that it is possible for the European Council to accept a new institution in the monetary field, in addition to present institutions in the community. But if we propose a new institution on the economic side, that means a revolution in the institutional framework of the community." I find this really interesting because the point was, and still is, no one wanted and no one still wants such a revolution. So whether in the 60s, in the 1980s, or in the 2020s, European policymakers try to work out a system preserving two seemingly impossible tasks: respect national sovereignties and respect the European interest. So it's difficult to work out. In the current Commission proposal, it takes the form of the so-called national ownership of the fiscal plan that is then approved by the Commission and eventually endorsed by the Council. But in doing so, the new proposal of the Commission raises again a number of issues, at least a couple of issues. One is the question of the early guidance provided by the Commission to member states for their fiscal trajectories. It can be useful, but it can also be viewed as problematic because it can be viewed as an attempt to preempt a member state choices. And it raises more broadly the question that Adrienne referred to, the question of the democratic framework in which this discussion takes place. Another element that is problematic from the Commission proposal is the fact that it doesn't include anything on the green transition. That was also something Adrienne referred to when mentioning the Italian position. Recently, a paper from Bruegel, from Joel Davas and Guntram Wolf was arguing that net green public investment could be excluded from fiscal indicators used for EU fiscal rules. So in proposing these important changes to the EU framework, I think the European Commission provided a good illustration of the two core challenges of any such exercise: developing an efficient framework while, in the current circumstances, refusing to centralize powers in the European Union. And I think in finding a satisfactory solution to this puzzle of these two aspects lay the development of a workable economic and monetary union. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for giving us the long-term view on these discussions. I'll move straight to Anna, who will complement our conversation from a legal perspective. Although I should have said she also worked for the Ministry of Finance of her country, Bulgaria, for a little while, if I remember correctly.
Don't hold that against me, please. Please don't.
So you bring in also non-Eurozone perspective to all that. Please click on your mic.
Is it on now? Well, this one doesn't light up here, but there's a light down there, so we'll assume that. And nobody seems to be complaining before, so we'll do that. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the invite. Firstly, what you'll hear from me today are the usual grievances that have been heard from lawyers ever since we were at this 10 years ago with the last round of reforms. The reason why that is happening is because the latest proposals, in my mind, continue a trajectory which was begun during the Eurozone crisis reforms. I did extensive work on the negotiations behind the Euro crisis reforms, behind the previous package. So it's really uncanny to see how certain ideas have been able to move forward. And with that in mind, I'd like to speak to you on three themes that I see sort of being pushed forward now even more. One of them is soft law and a particular blend of legal competences. The other one is on national ownership. And the last one is the quantification of risk. If I have a little bit of time, I'll touch on other few topics that I think might be of interest for further discussion, but that's about it. So the Commission package lists legislative reforms in the SGP, but actually they're reforms that are supposed to be introduced in the economic governance framework, which barely registers more of a footnote, which are happening with the macroeconomic imbalances procedure. There is a Q&A document from the Commission, which reads, pursuing a more forward-looking application of the MIP, I'll call it, can be accommodated within the existing legal framework. Now, this is the stuff that lawyers abhor. This is the stuff that when we introduced the macroeconomic imbalances procedure 10 years ago, that is what a lot of people in the legal community were very concerned about, with soft law measures, with something which is not really quantifiable as such. It is also, there was a lot of research being done from the political science community, in fact, on CSRs, on the fact that nobody was really sticking to those. The Commission was not really enforcing them. So why are we so concerned about this macroeconomic imbalance procedure and competitiveness? But the legal perspective here is, what is the potential of a certain legislative piece? It is not who is currently in power politically and willing to enforce it or not. Because as we see with this proposal, there is now finally interest to do something more with the competitiveness framework. So what happens under all this is that you have a generally unenforceable soft law instrument, which becomes cause for various forms of sanction later on under hard law instruments. And what is more curious is sometimes even the opposite, which is mentioned, and I don't have the example, but it is mentioned with the reforms now, where a non-obligatory instrument becomes obligatory once you move into a different, more like a harder form of procedure under the EDP, for example. So just so you have I'll just do a quick understanding of, just to give you a quick understanding of the excessive imbalances procedure under macroeconomic imbalances. That can escalate into very serious consequences for member states, including, for instance, on-site missions. During the last round of reforms, the task force which was behind proposing this wrote that, as in this area, that being competitiveness, health, pensions, education, anything that is technically within the national purview of member states, there may be long lags between the adoption of the corrective action and the actual resolution of the imbalances, and not necessarily a direct causality. The assessment of the council should focus on effective implementation. So then you have these procedures which are self-perpetuating processes. You're not being punished because you're not fixing something. You're not being punished because you're not implementing what you're being told to implement, even though the people telling you what to do are not 100% sure the thing is actually going to work. So that is the type of procedure we have going here. And then not only is the MIP getting an extra legal revamp, so to speak, without that being on paper, it's going to be a post-legal soft law document where the Commission is likely going to issue guidelines, I assume, on how to apply the MIP. But there is now going to be more cross-pollination. The SGP, the reformed SGP, and the directive actually interact with the MIP all throughout these procedures. Now, this merging is not the first time this is happening. It's just going to be a little more intensive, it seems like, this time. And that is because of the new fiscal plans that member states are going to give during the first part of the semester. Before that, we had two pillars where you have Article 121 with the competitiveness with the MIP, and you have Article 126 on debt and deficit. Those are two completely different legal bases for intervention. What you have now is that there's not going to be two different proposals. Member states are going to give one core plan. Now, within that plan, the assumption is there's going to be identification of what belongs where and under what legal base. But that already confounds how we then go through the assessment, and what is even more important in this case, the enforcement, because Article 126 in the SGP procedure gives you much harder rules, which is where this cross-pollination between soft law and hard law happens. Now, the commission has often been quoted to do such to adopt such reforms. These are usually coined as streamlining of the process, right? Of course, that's a legitimate concern, but it does not in any way answer for what would be a bit of a hodgepodge, really, of legal instruments all found in very heavy documents being put together. As a side note, I think it's very interesting. The commission is looking to give more powers to the fiscal board because that was a proposal which was given by the European Central Bank back in the day. And the bank was very interested to have an independent body to actually oversee what the commission was doing and to pull some powers away. So I think it's very interesting to see that that is something which has now made it on the agenda yet again as well. Which brings me to national ownership. Marco here will have to probably forgive me on my take on this. It has just always seemed to me like a bit of a euphemism in dealing with issues of national sovereignty whenever I see it in EU legal language. National fiscal councils, they cannot possibly result in national ownership. They're independent institutions. They're absolutely independent institutions. The fact that these are passport holders of the country where they are working in no way creates national ownership. It just means that it brings EU rules closer to the national level. These essentially become auditing bodies of member state finance ministries. And the dynamic creates what looks to me like this new government's legitimation of the democratic process of budgeting, just on the most core national level. The consequences of ignoring the advice of national fiscal councils, of course, become heightened in this whole, soft law, hard law relationship as you move through these procedures. I also need to point out that these are now going to be involved more and more throughout the procedures that member states have to follow with the Commission. Questions arise, why do member states have to replicate EU level rules, which they're already under obligation to comply with? Why are we doing this on 2 levels, on so many levels? And also, I think that there is the involvement of national judicial systems, which now have to enforce EU rules. There's a bit of a diagonal conflict there, I would think, procedurally. I'll move to the last part because I see I'm running out of time. It's the quantification of risk, which I wanted to talk to you about. There is a line in these reform documents that says that this is a major theme of the reforms. And for lawyers, I think that is proceduralizing risk is something very strange. We cannot, it's a bit like the Minority Report movie. You cannot punish something which has not occurred. And yet these frameworks are more and more focused towards that, towards what is the risk of non-compliance with a deadline. In certain cases, you have a risk assessment, which is part of what's happening under a certain procedure already. And in other cases, risk assessment can actually trigger a procedure of its own and bring a mission to your member state. It's a loss of legal certainty, basically risk-based surveillance. Very quickly, leftovers, because maybe some of you think those are interesting. I think that there's no special treatment for green investment. And I think that's going to be a very big political issue, especially if we consider the Dutch case politically of what's going on now, because entire industries would need to be helped out. On debt sustainability analyses, I think it is very interesting. The Commission has actually picked on that because now we have the ECB doing that, the ESM doing that, the IMF, sure, but they're not part of our structure, so we're not going to talk about them. So it's very interesting that's becoming a centerpiece, even though everybody has a different methodology for doing it. And speaking of methodologies, the Commission gets to unilaterally amend the technical annexes to this entire procedure, except for Annex 1. It's basically like moving the goalpost, having the power to do that when, when the entire enterprise is extremely technical. Thank you. Sorry for going over.
Oh, thank you very much, Anna, for your contribution. I'm grateful. You also raised some critical legal points. I should confess to you, I have a less critical view of the Commission proposals, but we can come back to that in the Q&A. And in fact, being conscious of time, since we only have another 30 minutes, I will refrain from saying anything right now and rather open up the floor. In the room, we have lots of experts. There are a number of people also online listening to us. So if you are online, send your question either in chat or simply raise your virtual hand. And if you are in the room, do raise your real hand. Please, and kindly introduce yourself for the benefit also of the people who are listening online.
Right. I'm Plutarchos Sakelaris. I'm a Schuman Fellow here. Yeah, it's on. Plutarchos Sakelaris, Schuman Fellow here at the Robert Schuman Center. Thank you very much, everybody. I think, listening to all four interventions, I cannot help but think that the problems that that Marco noted of the current rules are very much likely to be similar problems in the new ones, or at least some of them, in the sense that complex rules. What I see here from these presentations is that these rules are going to become even more complex in terms of things that people have to be achieving and countries have to be achieving. So the question that I have in there is that, could it be that in the negotiation between the Council and the European Parliament, they could actually achieve something that is a bit less complex than what I think is what the Commission has actually proposed at the moment? Or do you think that this is going to lead to something that's even more complex than what we actually have here? So I see really a need here for simplification of these rules that have been proposed by the European Commission.
Marco, would you like to reply immediately? And maybe also use that opportunity.
As you like, because I had some comments also on.
Of course, I assume so.
The participants just to animate it.
Shall we ask Eric to ask this question first and then we collect everything?
Okay, very good. Yes, absolutely.
Eric Jones.
I thought this was really terrific, and I wanted to jump in after Plutarchos's comment, because as I read through the three proposals, I have to admit, I found it a much more pleasant read than going through the amended legislation that they're meant to replace. So I think there has been a considerable simplification of the rule-based regime, but I respect that it's still complicated. I guess my question is, to what extent does this proposal represent an extension of the experience of the European Commission in its new role managing the national recovery and resilience plans? Because the strong feeling that I got out of this is that it's a reflection of the new governance model. And it's an extension of that new governance model into the macroeconomic space. And as such, I can understand very clearly why there's opposition from those countries that are not as intimately familiar with this new governance model, because they're not participating in it to the same degree. But I wonder if that opposition can be overcome. I have a very strange feeling that this might be a more fortuitous environment, particularly given the cliff edge on the reactivation or the deactivation of the general escape clause that comes at the end of this. Because I think you're right, Adrian, that there are some people who might want to go back to the old regime, but I'm not sure how numerous they are.
Marco, would you like to begin? Then we ask the panelists to.
Okay, man. I hope to be short, because there were many very fundamental questions. So let me say, okay, first of all, again, I think the amongst the national contributions, and we have had several, the one you did not mention but played a key role is a contribution actually from Spain and the Netherlands. This was a 2 to 3 pages, you know, a very short one, but that was basically it outlined a bit the key elements of what the Commission then dressed up and articulated in a much more rounder way. But in a sense, that's irrelevant because it breaks to a certain extent the north-south divide. So this is important. So please go back to that to that short paper because it's a relevant one. Then obviously in the next step of the discussion, the Netherlands, both the Netherlands and Spain came up with their more traditional instincts, let's say. But at least that element there, I think, is important. In fact, if one tries to assess what is the chance of having an agreement at the end of the day, is having, in a sense, mixed up and disarticulated the classic North-South debate is probably an element which politically is going to be an important, development if we manage to get to a new agreement. First point. Second point, big discussion in many countries, including the one who hosts the EUI, on the Commission power in this. And here you have actually two opposite views. You have those who are saying, look, you lock the Commission in a room with the member states, they will get to collusion, and basically the Commission will give in, and member states will get out what they want. So this is one view, is the German, let's say, and German inverted commas perspective. You have others who say, well, they lock ourselves in a room, the Commission comes with big sticks, and we get out battered, and the Commission imposes their own will. So these are the power of the Commission from two completely different, actually opposite perspectives. I mean, in reality, I mean, what the Commission has tried to do in the proposal is to, and here all speakers, Emanuela also in particular, I mean, put the finger on that. We try to balance out how to make sure that we have, let's say, a common framework together with an articulation at the national level, which respects this ownership that we talked about. So I have to say, initially, when we started to elaborate based on this Spanish-Dutch paper, the initial ideas, we did not have the proposal that was eventually this step 0, which is the Commission coming forward with technical trajectories. So we did not have that, but having listened then to the need to some member states to say, okay, you do not, you have to avoid the risk to end up in ad hoceris and a fully tailor-made proposal. So we put this as a technical initial technical step, which would play an important role, but let's say it's a technical contribution in the first place. Okay, let me try to explain you how the system would work should the current legislative proposal be adopted as such. So what is going to happen would be that for countries with debt above 60%, the Commission will apply the DSA analysis and derive trajectories for a gradual reduction of public debt and the associated net expenditure rule. So debt and the associated net expenditure rule. For 4 years. So a plan of 4 years. So this is going to be put on the table, and will be the start of the discussion. Let me put open an important bracket on the DSA. I think the DSA is like democracy. Now we are here so it's the worst of all possible systems apart from all the others. So because if you go for and we know DSA has an element of complexity, etc. But compared to numerical rules, which I think I tell you in my definite experience, intelligent ex ante, stupid ex post. So this is what I think one can safely conclude. So it has an element of economic underpinning. I have to say this is not something that it is not correct to say that this is everybody has his own DSA methodology. I mean, what we use in Europe is something that is actually devised in the committees, any subgroup of committees devised together with the member states. So it reflects exactly the consensus on that. The DSA and the technical trajectory, so the DSA methodology and the application are going to be published. They're going to be public, and the technical trajectories of the Commission can be reproduced by all scholars, policymakers, observers, etc. So it will be clear what the assumptions are in that. So the element of I say it is a complex instrument, but I don't think it is correct to say it's a black box. So this is the DSA. So I close this important parenthesis because it is one of the elements that have been in not only here but more generally criticized in the debate. So I go back to the process. The Commission has come forward with the technical trajectories for years and for the next expenditure rule. The ball goes to the member states, who have to come forward with the fiscal structural plan. The member state can say, look, what the Commission has put on the table is fine with me. It's I think it has a reasonable adjustment in that it reflects more or less what I would want to do. Fine. I incorporate that kind of broadly that kind of scenario into my fiscal structure plan. So this is an option. The other option is to say, and I have to say, if you think about high debt countries, it is more likely to be the case in which the member state says, I think this 4-year plan is too demanding for us. And I think I want to take more time and get a plan with a more gradual debt reduction. And what I do, so and in the proposal of the Commission, you can extend from 4 till 7 years. So it's a 7-year plan. And I look at the annexes in the Commission proposal, if those are adopted, and I come forward with a number of reforms and investment options, which are complying with the country-specific recommendations, complying also if I have an imbalanced procedure with the MIP relevant recommendations, and with the EU priorities, for instance, on defense, security, that are adopted, at the European level. And that is what the country comes forward with. The country can argue also, because the Commission is not going to do it in the first shot, the 4 years, is that these reforms and investment, they actually allow to boost growth and looking forward potential growth. So you have an impact through the denominator. So that is also what so it would improve the DSA according to if you factor in these reforms and investment. So this is the reforms and investment priorities and EU relevant priorities at the national level are not going to be dictated by the Commission. They come from the choices at the national level. Obviously, the Commission will scrutinize whether they are in compliance with the country-specific recommendation of the priorities. So I think the idea that we would actually achieve the opposite results, which is a lack of ownership instead of more ownership, I think is, in my view, is not correct. Now let's see what happens in the discussion. Now, in the discussion, what we have, the most prominent criticism has come from Germany. There is there again a 3-pager non-paper with a number of proposals. At the end of the day, the crux of the matter for Germany is they want a quantitative benchmark. So they want a number, one or more numbers there, so that when you come to actually assess compliance, you have a clear number. We in the Commission proposals, in the legislative proposal, we have refrained from giving a number, and we did not translate all this into what Germany have proposed. I mean, how much debt reduction per year, or how much expenditure growth below potential growth, etc. We did not give that. However, what we did, and we went in the direction of Germany there, is to try to avoid an opportunistic use on the part of the member states of the flexibility that is built in the system. And what is the opportunistic interpretation of this is that you have 7-year plan, you shift the adjustment all in the last 3 years. So basically, the adjustment will be done by the next government, know yourself. So what we have done there is that, okay, we said good share, and I mean, we can go into detail, but I don't want to bother you with that. At the end of the 4 years, you need to have done a good share of the adjustment already. That at the end of the 4 years, even if you have a plan of 7 years, would have to be lower than the beginning, etc. So, in a sense, what we did there, let's summarize that. We went into a more quantitative direction, but we refrained from going to a numerical one. So, build, into the, little specific numbers. So this is what we did. Let me reply to Plutarchus on the complexity and the various criticisms, and then end with Eric on the issue of the reflect the new governance model. I mean, on complexity, I think here we have now in the pact several indicators, some conflicting. I think what we are going to have there is, at the end of the day, is the commitments are translated into net expenditure growth. So one indicator. So this is, and more than the structural deficit or the structural balance under the control of government. So this is a simplification. The 1/20th is one of the rules is going to go away. I think the pro-cyclical bias in good and bad times, there is a risk there, but the expenditure rules actually reduces the compared to the structural balance, the pro-cyclical bias. And actually, if you are commitment on nominal expenditure, if you have then the denominator going up or down according to the cycle, I think you will have an anti-cyclical built-in bias. Limited incentive for reform and investment. I think here the issue will be to have, and this links up to Eric's point. We have, so countries will be given more time to do the right thing. So that is the built-in incentive. So you have a less adjustment every year. And this, in a sense, is a bit the link with the new governance model and the next generation EU. It is obvious that the next generation EU has money behind. So it's a more powerful incentive than giving more time to do certain things. But the logic it's a bit the same. So in a sense, what you are saying with the parallel between next generation EU and the new SGP, the fiscal structure plans, I think there is a parallelism there, though the degree of scrutiny is going to be less, less detailed under the SGP, precisely because we are not talking about European money, than under Next Generation EU and the programs. I think, and so I think I've taken most of the points that have been offered.
Thank you, Marco. I don't know if anyone else from the panel wants to join in or add something. If not, I might have. Well, let me look around. If anybody's interested in asking.
Hi,
Antonio.
may I have the floor?
Of course. Please feel free to ask your question.
Hello, Marco. Nice to see you. Look, we are, having listened to you, we are entering in a brave new world, and hopefully a successful one. If I remember the starting point of all this, which is the Maastricht Treaty and the discussions one had, we are moving definitely from a rules-based system to a discretion-based system. And this is a major, in my view, major risk. And it's interesting, having listened to experts as you are, that I think only one of you mentioned the word excessive deficit. And as this was not, I mean, the purpose of Article 126, which is a major article in our Bible, which is the treaty. And one of the issues I would put forward, and having listened to the lady in black, when she mentioned Article 121 and Article 126, is that, I mean, the policies other than fiscal policy are in the domain of the countries, and therefore, I mean, they do not agree, I mean, to have coordination on that. But then why on fiscal policy? Because of monetary policy. It's simple as that. What is not for monetary policy, and Article 126 would not be there. I mean, the issue is excessive deficits are a major problem for the conduct of monetary policy, and therefore, I mean, we have to have a system to get rid of those excessive deficits. This was the main issue. But now we are entering in a totally different world, and it was for me very interesting having listened to you. But I think I have to say good luck. I came out of this debate a bit frightened or a bit scared, to be very frank, because having been present to the building up of the treaty and the excessive deficit procedure and what it meant, and seeing now that, for instance, Marco, in this approach, one idea which was very dear to you, if I remember well, which is the aggregate fiscal policy stance for the euro area as a whole, this is a concept which will have to disappear, because, I mean, only by chance, with probability equal to 1, having national plans, you can be sure that you have an adequate fiscal policy for the euro area as a whole, and other issues as well. And finally, I would, how shall I say, I would advise not to be very negative on the existing rules, not only because you and I participated actively on them, and we have to have in mind how the rules were since the treaty was or entered into force. We have the first era in which the correction of the deficit had to occur in year T+1. Then we have the 2003-2005 reform, where non-observable variables were entered in the equation, so to speak. Then we have the debt crisis, and then we have the rules which exist now. We have the fiscal compact, which I have not heard any reference to. And now, I mean, it's almost a U-turn. I'm speaking on my own, of course. And if we insist in saying that existing rules, they are very complex, remains to be seen how the new rules will be, that no one's understand them, that's which is not correct. I mean, and there are also rules on law and on other areas of knowledge which are complex but not necessarily wrong. But in any case, I learned a lot. I thank very much Professor Federico, Marco Butti, and all the colleagues. But I skipped my lunch and I did not lose the appetite. But I'm not very how shall I say, relaxed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio. I hope at least it provided some food for thought, if not real food, the seminar. I don't know if there's anyone else online or in the room who wants to step in. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, and thank you very much for this super interesting discussion. Much better than the previous one I went in Brussels 1 week ago with the same topic. So congratulations to the organizers. My name is Odysseas Konstantinakos. I'm doing my PhD here at the UI on European macroeconomic policy. And I want to touch another issue that was briefly mentioned, but I think it's going to be potentially very dangerous and might create some friction between member states and the Commission. And this is on the 4 or 7 year plans. Because what I'm thinking of is that politics lies in the construction of these plans at the national level. And the intention of the Commission here is decent. You're throwing the ball to member states to decide their own way out of their debt and how to conform to the rules. But what we have seen the last years is a very fast turnover of governments. So especially for Italy, we have an average lifespan of a government which is below 2 years. So what happens when a government changes, and how fast can we transition from one national plan to another, especially if the governments that are succeeding each other are coming from opposite sides of the political spectrum? So long story short, what I'm asking is that you're trying to get outside the national politics and increase national ownership. But I think you're going to find yourself again in the middle of political crossfire at the national level, where the Commission will have to be the arbitrary between whose national plan is better and more fiscally sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll collect a final question as well. Please.
I was part of the design. Sorry. My name is Ben Sufstrana. I'm a visiting fellow at the Schuman. I have a concept. I ask you forgiveness for not being that well versed in some of the stuff we've been talking about today, but I have a conceptual issue that interests me, and that is the status of the concept of investment as opposed to consumption when it comes to public budgets. Because the country I come from, Norway, it has been almost forbidden by the Ministry of Finance to speak of any public investment as investment because it's dangerous, it will be stretched, and politicians will grab it as an opportunity to put it. So to me, this is a confusing conceptual landscape, and I'd just like to ask, sort of, to what degree do you have conceptual clarity in the Commission and in the talks between the Commission and member states about sort of when this is on the table as an issue, to what degree is it conceptually clear? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I guess, Marco, you get again to go first, since many questions were addressed to you.
Okay, no, let me take Antonio's points. So this reminds me of a couple of lives ago when we worked together, but these are very relevant questions. I think, let me say, I take 2 points only. One is, okay, we have not discussed much about EDP, but the point is here is that in the regulation on the corrective arm, what we are proposing, so what the Commission is proposing, is actually to have not fully automatic, but a quasi-automatic of opening of the excessive deficit procedure. So the element of stronger ownership and commitment on the net expenditure path, should the deviation from there come from not benign reasons, so because of crisis or other events, then if you deviate from there, you can expect that you end up in excessive deficit. So we are not going to, it is not possible to disregard the relevant factors. That's one, it's in the treaty, so one has to consider that. But especially for high debt countries, if you do not comply with what yourself had put forward, and which was adopted by the scrutinized by the Commission, adopted by the Council, then you can expect you end up in EDP. And this is the counterpart, in a sense, on the punitive correction arm of more ownership that you have on the preventive arm. So I think this is it would in the approach of the Commission that will make the EDP more credible. Now, on the euro area fiscal stance, Antonio, I think that you are right in saying that it is something dear to my heart. I have achieved a definite conclusion on that point there. And it is that it is not possible to achieve if not by chance, an adequate euro area fiscal stance by decentralized coordination of national fiscal policies. So thinking that you force Germany or the Netherlands or whoever to do more expansion for the sake of the Eurozone simply doesn't work. So I think, so that's why my proposal in other fora, but this is something that we will discuss in the future here also, is to work on the vertical coordination and fiscal capacity. So with that is the way you reconcile the need for prudence and appropriate national fiscal policy, fiscal stance with an aggregate fiscal stance at the euro area level, not via horizontal coordination and fine tuning at the national level. So this is okay. Let me stop here because there were other questions, but maybe I stop here. I give the opportunity to other two colleagues to chip in.
Yes, thanks, Mark. I'm conscious of time, but I would like to give to Adrian, Emmanuel, and Anna an opportunity to step in again for some final thoughts and discussion. Adrian, maybe.
Yes, thanks. Just 4 points to the question of, do you think in the kind of in trilogues of the Council and the Parliament, there will be simplification of the rules? I don't think so. I think it will be more complex, not more simple. And the second point, NGU as a model, has been a model in the design, but we can't say anything about implementation. And what we know for Italy, for instance, it doesn't look good in terms of being an efficient implementation of the money which is available, although huge incentives are there, right? So in that sense, we can't say it is a model as regards implementation. And as regards the 2 phases of the Commission in negotiating with different member states, I think it depends very much on the power balance within these bilateral negotiations, on the persons involved, how knowledgeable they are, because of course the EC can come with an enormous weight, right? But how much power can be brought in by a member state, a highly indebted member state, that varies across, I think, the different bilateral individual negotiations. And the final point on this soft law, hard law kind of interaction, which I found really very interesting, I would like to read more about, where you have kind of a hidden expansion of power of the Commission, which you don't really know once you adopt the law. So I would like to see you have published about that, I guess. So I would love to read it.
Emmanuel, do you want to say something? No. Anna, go ahead.
I need to address. I did this one's a bit, yeah. It's a very quick answer to the choice between left and right-wing government's choices once you're into the procedure. For one thing, The procedure allows for governments that are incoming to fiddle around with the objectives that they have put forth in their fiscal plans, even if they're with whatever they see once they come into power. So that's technically allowed for. But for another thing, it's a false choice. There is no choice to be made. Whether you're a left-wing or a right-wing government, whatever your political priorities are, they all have to happen within the bounds of budgetary responsibility. And that's at the end of the day, that is what the plans are about. So whatever you're doing, you're moving money from your left pocket to your right pocket. What the Commission, what the EU cares about is how much money you're keeping in your pockets. So it's just a different, it's different relationships, like vertically and horizontally moving of money. And to answer Adrienne, like really quickly, it's not just the Commission. This whole soft law narrative is like a general EU phenomenon, so we can't just blame the Commission on that. Yeah, thank you.
Small point on your second last point. I think this is a huge problem for democracy in member states, because you promise in a campaign what you're going to do, and then you come into government, if that's the outcome of the elections, and then you can't do it, right? You become totally unbelievable.
Within the limits of what, within the limits of money.
Although I shall say, Adrian, in response to that, of course, we have treaty in the European Union that create these interdependencies, including Article 121 that says that economic policy is a matter of common concerns across the member states. So in a sense, it's true that national democracy is constrained, but that's by design. It's been agreed by countries when they ratified the treaties themselves. And in a way, as long as you have a monetary union, it is inevitable that there will have to be some mutual surveillance over the action of each country. I suppose the time doesn't allow us to continue farther than that, but it has been a fascinating conversation. The one legal point I would have added is that we talk about a reform of the Stability and Growth Pact, but it's really a new regulation as far as the preventive arm of the SGP is concerned, whereas it's an amendment to a prior council regulation for the corrective arm of the SGP, and that's a result of different legal bases, different procedures that are applying. So we will have to see how that plays out. And maybe a final point I would make, reconnecting myself with what you just discussed, Marco, but also the point you were asking, Eric, is really that the discussion about the Stability and Growth Pact is only one piece of the puzzle of the broader discussion about the new economic governance in Europe. And here there is the implementation of Next Generation EU with the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. But I think also really, at least to me, the big question of fiscal capacity for the European Union and possibly a sovereign fund for investment in environmental transition or security that is under discussion at EU level. So I hope this will be the first of perhaps many conversations we might have on this topic. The DCU Brexit Institute has partnered with the UI since 2019, so we see this as yet one further step in our collaboration. And I think, Eric, you should really get the final words because you've been co-chairing and handling these slides show as well. So thanks again for your hospitality here in Villa Schifanoia.
Well, Federico, I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to perfect my shared Zoom screen skills. The only thing that I would say is we have Mathilde Seron in the room, and she's going to present at 5 o'clock. So if any of you is trying to stay out of the sun, then please stick around and we'll start again. But unfortunately, for those of you online, we're going to end the recording now and we'll shut down. Thank you all so much for joining us remotely, and thank you in particular for participating in the conversation.